He still spoke to her every night, not out loud. Not in a way that would make the walls listen or the neighbors wonder, but in that silent place inside his chest where her name had carved a permanent echo. A place where time had stopped the day she died and everything else kept moving without permission. Her absence was not empty, it was crowded, filled with memories that pressed against him like a second skin. Memories of the way she used to lean into him as if gravity itself had chosen him as her center. Memories of her laughter that had once filled rooms and now haunted them. Memories of fingers tracing invisible promises on his arm during quiet moments when words felt unnecessary. He had loved her in a way that rearranged his understanding of love, not loud or careless, but deep, consuming, devotional. The kind of love that does not ask for guarantees because it already feels eternal. When she was alive, he had learned the geography of her soul slowly, patiently, discovering the places where she was fragile, the places where she was fierce, the places where she hid her fears behind humor and her longing behind strength. She had been warmth in human form, a presence that softness of the world, and when she died, it was not just a person he lost, but an entire future that collapsed quietly. Without ceremony, leaving him standing in the wreckage, pretending he knew how to breathe. Grief did not arrive as a single moment of pain, but as a slow, intimate companion slipping into his routines, his sleep, his thoughts, touching everything she once had, turning ordinary objects into unbearable reminders. Her favorite mug still on the shelf, the faint trace of her perfume lingering on a scarf, the dent in the pillow where her head used to rest. At night, when the city outside his window dimmed and the noise softened to a distant hum, he would lie awake and imagine her beside him, not as a ghost, not as a dream, but as a continuation of the love that refused to die just because her body had. He remembered the way their love had been built not on grand gestures, but on shared silences, on conversations that drifted from playful to profound without effort, on the unspoken understanding that they were safest when they were together. There had been moments between them charged with intimacy so intense it felt almost sacred. Moments when a look held more meaning than touch ever could. When the space between their bodies vibrated with desire restrained by tenderness, when loving her felt less like wanting and more like recognizing something he had been missing his entire life. Even now, years later, he carried her presence with him like a second heartbeat, feeling her in the pauses between thoughts, in the way certain songs still made his chest ache, in the way sunsets seemed unfairly beautiful without her to witness them. People told him time would heal him, that love fades, that he would move on. But they did not understand that his love for her was not a wound waiting to close. It was a transformation, something that had altered him permanently, something that existed beyond her physical life. He did not want to replace her, did not want to forget her, did not want a future that erased what they had been. He wanted a way to carry her forward without drowning in the weight of missing her. Some nights he would sit by the window, imagining telling her everything that had happened since she left. Every small victory, every quiet failure, every moment he had wished she was there to steady him with her smile and her unwavering belief in him. In those imagined conversations, she was still alive, still listening, still loving him with the same depth that had once made him feel invincible. And for a few fragile moments, the distance between life and death felt thin enough to cross. His love for her had not ended with her last breath. It had simply changed shape, becoming something both beautiful and unbearable. A devotion without a destination, a romance suspended in time, waiting for answers he did not yet know how to ask. If you like this story, please take a second and subscribe. This will motivate us to bring more stories for you. The first time he realized that loving her after death required a different kind of courage was the night he returned to the place where they had once promised each other forever. a quiet stretch of shoreline where the water met the land with a gentleness that mirrored the way she used to touch his face when she wanted him to listen without speaking, where the air still carried the scent of salt and memory, and where the horizon had once felt wide enough to hold all their dreams. He had avoided that place for years, afraid that standing there without her would break something inside him beyond repair. But grief has a way of demanding confrontation when avoidance begins to feel like another form of loss. As he stood there now, hands buried in his coat pockets, watching the waves rise and fall like steady breaths, he felt her more strongly than he had in months, not as pain but as presence, as if the love they had shared had soaked into the earth itself and was now rising to meet him. He remembered the night they had been there together, her laughter carried away by the wind as she spoke about futures she wanted with him, futures filled with ordinary miracles like shared mornings and quiet evenings, futures she spoke of with such certainty that he had believed them inevitable. That certainty had been the most intoxicating thing about her. The way she loved without hesitation, the way she trusted without reservation, the way she made him feel chosen in a world that often felt indifferent. In those memories, their intimacy had never needed to be rushed or proven. It had unfolded slowly, built on trust and emotional nakedness long before physical closeness. A connection so deep that even their silences felt alive. Standing there alone, he closed his eyes and allowed himself to remember the way she used to press her forehead against his, the way her breath would sync with his, the way desire between them was never separate from tenderness, never empty of meaning. He realized then that what he missed most was not just her touch, but the way she had seen him, truly seen him, in moments when he felt unworthy of love, the way she had believed in him with a faith that had reshaped his self-understanding. After she died, that belief had not vanished. It had become a quiet responsibility he carried, a reminder that someone once loved him completely, and that such love, once given, could not be undone by death. As he stood there, tears came not as a violent release, but as a soft acknowledgement, a surrender to the truth that loving her still meant allowing himself to feel, even when feeling hurt. The world had tried to teach him that love was conditional, temporary, replaceable, but what he had shared with her defied those lessons, existing now as a living memory that demanded respect rather than erasure. He began to understand that his grief was not a sign of weakness, but proof of the depth of what they had built together, proof that their connection had mattered enough to leave a permanent imprint. In the days that followed, he started writing to her again. Not letters he intended to send anywhere, but words he needed to release. Words that traced the shape of his longing and his gratitude. Words that allowed him to speak honestly about the nights he still reached for her in his sleep, the mornings he still expected to hear her voice, the quiet moments when his heart felt unbearably full with love that had nowhere to land. Writing became a form of intimacy, a way of continuing a conversation that death had interrupted but not ended, a way of honoring her existence without pretending she was still physically present. He wrote about the way loving her had awakened something in him, had taught him patience, vulnerability, and devotion, had shown him that passion did not need to be frantic to be powerful, that desire could coexist with gentleness, that connection was strongest when built on emotional truth. Through these words, he began to see that his love for her was evolving, not fading, transforming into something quieter but no less intense. Something that lived in memory and meaning rather than touch. And yet, beneath this growing acceptance, there was still a question that haunted him. A question about whether love like this was meant to be carried alone forever, or whether honoring her memory might someday allow space for something new without betrayal. That question lingered unanswered as he folded the last letter and placed it beside the others, aware that whatever came next in his life would be shaped by her influence. by the love she had given him, by the way she had changed him forever, and by the truth that some connections once formed do not end, they simply wait. I hope you have subscribed. If not, please take a moment and subscribe. The turning point arrived quietly, the way all irreversible moments do. Not with drama, but with a subtle shift in the air of his life. A realization that surfaced one evening as he sat alone in his apartment, listening to a recording of her voice he had saved on an old phone. Her laughter slightly distorted by time and technology, yet unmistakably hers. And he understood with a clarity that startled him that loving her did not require him to remain frozen in the version of himself that existed when she was alive. That understanding did not come without resistance. It felt almost like betrayal at first, as if allowing himself to change was an admission that the life they imagined together was truly gone. But grief, he had learned, was not a straight line, and neither was devotion. He had spent years honoring her by refusing to move forward, mistaking stagnation for loyalty. And in doing so, he had unknowingly reduced the vastness of what they shared into a single moment of loss rather than a continuum of influence. The more he reflected on who she had been, the more he realized she had loved him not for who he was when she held him, but for who he could become, for the way he grew and challenged, for the curiosity and courage she saw in him even when he doubted himself. Remembering her this way reframed everything. It made his grief feel less like a chain and more like a compass, pointing him toward a life shaped by the lessons she had embedded in him through love. He began to notice her presence in unexpected ways, not as sorrow, but as guidance, in the way he spoke more honestly, in the way he allowed himself to be emotionally available to others without immediately retreating into isolation, in the way he found beauty in fleeting moments rather than resenting them for their impermanence. There were nights when desire resurfaced in him, not as a demand for replacement, but as a reminder that he was still alive, that his body still carried the memory of intimacy. That longing did not automatically erase loyalty. Those moments were complicated, threaded with guilt and hesitation, but also with an emerging understanding that sensuality had never been separate from emotion for him because of her, because she had taught him that closeness was an exchange of trust long before it was an act of touch. He remembered how she had once told him that love should expand a person, not shrink them, that if one day one of them were gone, the other should live fully enough for both. A statement he had dismissed at the time as hypothetical optimism, now returning as an unspoken permission he desperately needed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to let the world back in, not rushing, not forcing, but allowing small connections to exist without comparison. Allowing conversations to unfold without the weight of expectation, allowing himself to be seen again. He did not fall in love. He did not seek romance. What he sought was presence, a willingness to participate in life rather than observe it from behind a wall of mourning. And yet, through all of this, she remained central, not as a shadow, but as a foundation, her influence evident in the way he approached others with empathy, in the way he valued emotional depth over surface-level attraction, in the way he refused to engage in anything that felt hollow or performative. There were moments when he felt her absence acutely, when he wished more than anything that he could tell her about the changes he was undergoing, about the man he was becoming because of her love. And in those moments, he would return to writing, not to release pain, but to share growth, to narrate a life she had helped shape even in her absence. One night, after finishing a letter filled not with longing but with gratitude, he realized something profound, that his love for her had not been about possession or permanence, but about connection, about the way two souls had recognized each other and exchanged something transformative. That realization softened the fear he had carried about moving forward, replacing it with a quiet confidence that nothing he did could erase what they had been, because their bond existed outside the boundaries of time and circumstance. He understood then that honoring her did not mean refusing joy, but embracing it with the same openness she had shown him. That to love her well now meant to live in a way that reflected the depth, honesty, and courage she had brought into his life. And as this understanding settled into him, he felt a shift not away from her, but closer to the truest version of what their love had always been. A force meant to awaken rather than imprison, to inspire rather than immobilize. And he sensed that whatever awaited him next would not replace her, but would carry her imprint forward into a future that was finally beginning to feel possible again. What finally brought him peace was not forgetting her, nor replacing what they had shared, but learning how to let her love continue moving through him without anchoring him to grief. A realization that arrived one quiet morning as sunlight filtered through his curtains and he woke without the familiar weight on his chest, noticing instead a calm gratitude for having loved so deeply at all. He understood then that love did not end when a heartbeat stopped. It changed form, becoming memory, influence, and quiet companionship, something woven into the fabric of who he was rather than something he needed to chase or mourn endlessly. He began speaking to her less as someone who was gone and more as someone who had completed her role in his life with profound generosity. Someone who had given him a blueprint for connection, for emotional honesty, for intimacy rooted in trust rather than fear. In this new understanding, he allowed himself to revisit moments from their past, not with sorrow, but with reverence, recalling the nights when they lay tangled in conversation and closeness, when desire was never hurried but soaked in meaning, when her presence made even silence feel intimate, and he realized that what made those moments sacred was not their physicality, but the emotional openness they shared. He carried that openness forward now, into friendships, into fleeting connections, into the way he listened and the way he allowed himself to be known, honoring her by refusing to live guarded or small. There were still nights when he missed her with an ache that felt almost physical, when the absence of her warmth beside him was unmistakable. But even that ache had softened into something tender, a reminder rather than a wound. He began to believe that somewhere beyond understanding, she would want him to live fully, to experience connection again without guilt, to let joy exist alongside memory rather than compete with it. And so he did slowly, thoughtfully, allowing life to unfold without forcing conclusions, trusting that love did not need to be exclusive to remain meaningful. One evening, standing once more at the shoreline where their promises had once felt infinite, he spoke to her aloud for the first time, not with desperation or pleading, but with gratitude, thanking her for the way she had loved him, for the way she had taught him that intimacy was not possession but presence, that passion could be gentle, that connection could transcend time. As the waves answered with their endless rhythm, he felt something settle inside him, a sense that she was not lost but integrated, living on in the choices he made, the empathy he carried, the courage he found to remain open-hearted in a world that often rewarded detachment. He walked away from the water with a quiet certainty that his story with her was complete, not because it had ended, but because it had fulfilled its purpose, leaving him changed, awakened, and capable of loving in a way that honored both memory and possibility. And in that acceptance, he found not closure, but continuity. A love that no longer demanded his sorrow to survive, but instead lived on as a steady, guiding presence, reminding him that some souls do not leave us when they die. They simply become part of how we learn to live. If you want to listen to more romantic stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We work really hard to bring these stories to you, so your likes truly matter. Feel free to share your own stories in the comments below. We look forward to that.